The sirens weren't the first thing I heard. It was the roar of spinning blades, the kind of mechanical screech that tells you something is about to go horribly wrong. Then came the crash, sharp, metallic, and too close for comfort. I sprinted out of the barn, boots thudding against dirt, just in time to see a small single-engine plane rip through the south pasture, skid into a shallow ravine, and come to a twisted, smoking stop not 50 yards from my workshop. I didn't panic. I'm no stranger to emergency landings. I've been flying longer than most HOA board members have been alive. I dialed emergency services, shut off the nearest valve to the diesel tank, and ran toward the wreckage to check for survivors. 2 men were inside, shaken, bleeding but alive. I helped pull them free, flagged the first responders, and gave the FAA all the details I could. Everything was under control. Until she showed up. Karen, HOA president, self-declared community safety enforcer, and the last person you want near a federal investigation. She came marching across my property like she owned it. Phone in one hand, HOA badge in the other, demanding answers, shouting about unauthorized aircraft operations, and claiming I was conducting illegal activity on shared land. Before I could stop her, she had already called the local police and was trying to explain airspace law to the fire chief. That was her first mistake, because what she didn't know, what she refused to understand, is that my land isn't part of her HOA. It never was. And when she crossed that property line, tampered with an active crash site, and tried to direct federal responders, she didn't just overstep. She committed a felony. So while Karen thought she was calling the cops on me, she didn't realize the feds were already calling her name. That if Karen hadn't been stopped that day, if she had been allowed to stomp across my property unchecked, barking orders, touching wreckage, and spewing falsehoods like she was deputized by Congress, she could have cost me everything. My land, my reputation, maybe even my freedom. The thing people like her never understand is that once federal investigators are involved, the stakes jump from petty neighborhood politics to national aviation law. The moment that plane hit the dirt, my ranch became an active investigation site under FAA and NTSB authority. And any interference, even unintentional, could be classified as obstruction. If she contaminated the scene, moved debris, or misrepresented who I was or what had happened, I could have been blamed for tampering. I was already the property owner. The plane crashed on my land. That made me responsible for preserving the site, giving truthful statements, and ensuring no unauthorized individuals interfered. But Karen didn't care. She saw the flashing lights and smelled the chaos. And like every HOA tyrant with too much time and not enough jurisdiction, she inserted herself into something way above her pay grade. And she didn't just show up. She started issuing commands, telling emergency responders where to park, trying to rope off the site with HOA-issued cones, even telling a federal investigator that she would be filing an incident report on behalf of the community. As if my land, my ranch, was a community park. As if the crash was some neighbor's trash fire and not a full-blown aviation incident with potential criminal implications. And here's the terrifying part. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't stepped in, presented my ownership documents, and formally warned her to leave, she might have gotten away with it. Her lies, her arrogance, her trespassing could have rewritten the whole story. The investigation could have been compromised, and I would have taken a fall. Because that's how these things go. When something goes wrong, people look for someone to blame. And in Karen's eyes, that someone was me. The man living off the grid, keeping to himself, daring to operate a small private airstrip on legally zoned ranch land. She saw what happened and made up her mind instantly. It must be his fault. But she wasn't just a nuisance. She was a threat to the case, to the truth, to my future. And when I realized just how close she came to unraveling the entire federal investigation, that's when I knew this wasn't just about property rights anymore. It was about stopping someone who thought she was above the law before she dragged me down with her, that I didn't move to the ranch for attention. Hell, if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's that real peace doesn't come with noise. It's found in silence, the kind you can feel in your bones. The kind that wraps around you when you're 30 miles from the nearest gas station, when your boots hit dirt before the sun's had a chance to stretch, when the only thing cutting through the wind is the low hum of a Cessna gliding in on approach. That's the life I built for myself out here. It wasn't a life of convenience. It was earned. After 21 years in the Air Force, most of it spent either inside a hangar or behind a set of throttles, I retired with 2 bad knees, a head full of noise, and a craving for stillness I didn't know how to explain. I'd seen too much, done more than most. I wasn't broken, not exactly, but I needed something real, something grounded. So when the opportunity came up to buy the land, I didn't hesitate. 42 acres of dry scrub, open fields, and untamed sky. No paved roads, no fences worth naming, no cell towers poking the horizon. It had belonged to an old friend of my father's, a rancher who had no heirs and was tired of fighting property taxes. He offered me a deal, and I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. At the time, there was only one structure on the property, a leaning red barn with its ribs showing and a tin roof that whined every time the wind blew. But to me, it looked like freedom. I brought out a camper trailer the first week, parked it beside the barn, and started from scratch. Laid gravel where there was mud, fixed the water lines, installed solar, and eventually built the cabin by hand. Nothing fancy. 800 square feet of clean lines, polished concrete, and pine siding. The real crown jewel, though, was the strip. About a year into living there, I cleared a 1,400-foot stretch of earth at the east end of the property, just enough to qualify as a private airstrip. I didn't need much. Just a flat approach, a windsock in the sky. I've been flying small aircraft since I was 19. It was the one thing that still made sense when everything else felt noisy. I wasn't looking to run a business or sell fuel or train students. Just keep the craft alive. A few neighbors here and there, some ranchers, a guy who restored warboids, occasionally used the strip in emergencies or just to practice short field landings. It wasn't advertised. It wasn't lit. But it was safe, legal, and well-maintained. I logged every use, filed all the paperwork, paid all the fees. Quiet aviation for quiet people. And for the better part of 6 years, that's exactly what life was. Quiet. Each morning, I'd rise before dawn, coffee in hand, and walk the property line. Check fences. Watch the deer. Sometimes fly if the weather was calm. Most days, I kept to myself. Rebuilt engines in the barn. Took care of my chickens. Chopped wood. Rested. Repaired. Read. The land was healing, and so was I. Until the creeping edges of development began nipping at the horizon. It started small. A paved road showed up where there used to be gravel. Then came streetlights. Realtors began tossing flyers over my gate, touting rural charm just outside city reach. I shrugged it off. Most of it stayed west of the ridge, on the other side of the canyon that cut through the valley. But eventually, a neighborhood began to take shape not a mile from my back pasture. Oak Ridge Summit. HOA run. Pristine. Sterile. I saw the signs go up, then the sidewalks, then the gates. Gated community, they called it. Funny thing about gates, you never see who they're meant to keep out until you're the one standing on the other side. I figured it would stay out of my way. I didn't go to their meetings. I wasn't part of their association. My property had its own boundaries, its own zoning, its own easements. As far as I was concerned, we could exist in parallel. Me with my ranch, them with their manicured lawns and quarterly newsletters. But Karen didn't see it that way. I met her briefly once, maybe a year before the crash. She showed up uninvited, clipboard in hand, claiming she was surveying boundary encroachments for the HOA. She didn't introduce herself, just marched down my path like it was part of her jurisdiction. I stopped her at the gate, kindly but firmly explained that my land was private, not subject to her rules, and that she had no authority beyond her own little square. Her smile was tight. "We believe in community standards," she said. "We're all part of a greater whole." "No, Utopia. You're part of a development. I'm part of the land." She didn't like that. I didn't see her again, not until the plane crash. The thing about owning land, real land, is that it doesn't ask for much, but it demands respect. You don't tell the wind when to blow. You don't argue with the way trees lean. And you sure as hell don't try to manage the sky. Flying is the same way. I kept a 1968 Cessna 172 in the hangar. Old, reliable, perfectly maintained. A machine with character. She flew clean, steady, and faithful, as long as you treated her right. I didn't fly for show. I flew because it kept me whole, kept me balanced. Some mornings I just do a lap around the property, maybe touch down and go again, just to feel the engine purr through my chest. That's what the ranch gave me: structure, purpose, solitude. And until the day a small aircraft dropped out of the sky and tore through my east pasture like a plow blade, no one ever questioned what I did out there. But one crash changed all that. Because the second that plane hit the ground, my land wasn't mine anymore. Not in the eyes of the world. It became an incident site, a question mark, a headline waiting to happen. And to someone like Karen, it became a stage. It happened just afternoon. I remember because I just poured myself a second cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch to watch a storm system forming over the southern ridge. The clouds were fat and dark, but not dangerous, more theater than threat. I leaned on the rail, halfway through planning the rest of my day, replaced the wiring on the backup generator, maybe check the eastern fence line, when I heard it. A noise that didn't belong. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was mechanical, panicked, sputtering. I knew it instantly. An engine misfiring mid-flight. I turned toward the east, squinting past the tree line, and there she was, a Piper Herpé, 28, nose low, wings tilting like a drunk, trying to stay upright. It was coming in fast and sloppy. Too fast. Too low. I dropped the mug where I stood and sprinted. The pilot had done everything right, considering. He aimed for the only open space he could see, my airstrip. But he overshot, just a little, enough to clip a fence post, bounce hard, and careen into the gully beyond the tree line. When I got there, the plane was sideways, the left wing half-crumpled, fuel leaking from a ruptured tank, and the prop bent like a pretzel. Smoke, but no fire. I yanked the door open, thank God it hadn't jammed, and helped the pilot out. He was dazed, bleeding from the forehead, but alive. His passenger, too. Bruised, scared, but breathing. I moved fast. Radioed emergency dispatch. Shut off the main fuel switch. Secured the site. The ranch kicked into muscle memory. Years of training rushed forward. In minutes, the field was marked, the GPS coordinates relayed, and emergency services were en route. Then I heard her, even over the sound of sirens and rotor blades. I heard the unmistakable clack of those ridiculous flats she always wore and the voice that made my spine tighten on reflex. What in God's name is going on here? Karen, clipboard in hand, phone recording, phone already to her ear. I turned slowly, wiping sweat and fuel from my forehead. You need to step back. This is a crash site. I can see that, she barked, walking straight toward the wreck like she was inspecting a pothole. Is that your plane? No. It was an emergency landing. Help is already on the way. She paused just long enough to give me a look. One of those twisted expressions halfway between condescension and disgust. I told the board this would happen, she said. You've been using this land as an illegal airfield for years. This is exactly why we need HOA oversight on these properties. You're not in charge of this land, I reminded her. You never have been. She ignored me, already dialing. Yes, I'd like to report a plane crash. Yes, at the edge of Oak Ridge Summit. Yes, the property next to ours, the one with the illegal airstrip. I think he's hiding something. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. Karen, you are trespassing. This is my land. You're interfering with an active federal investigation. Oh, please, she snapped. Don't try to scare me with your aviation rules. I know how the HOA works. This isn't HOA. It's FAA. You're about to cross a line. And cross it she did. She marched straight to the wreckage, pulled out her phone, and started filming up close. This is proof, she muttered into the camera, documenting the hazard. This man has turned his property into a runway. Our children live right over that fence. This is criminal. The pilot was still sitting on the ground, being stabilized by first responders. Karen walked right past the EMTs like they were invisible. She stood within inches of the fuselage, taking photos, mumbling accusations under her breath. Then the chopper came. The FAA investigator, called in from the regional office, arrived with federal marshals before the ambulance had even cleared the gate. The moment their boots hit the ground, the tone shifted. Radios crackled. Badges flashed. The site turned from a ranch to a restricted zone in seconds. And there was Karen, still standing there like she ran the place. Until she didn't. One of the marshals, a tall woman with mirrored aviators and zero patience, approached her with a flat voice. "Ma'am, you need to leave this area immediately. This is a secured federal scene." Karen puffed up like a goose. "Excuse me? I'm the HOA president. I'm here on behalf of the community. I have documentation. This man has been operating an unlicensed airstrip on residential adjacent land. I am collecting evidence." The marshal didn't blink. "You are trespassing and interfering with an ongoing FAA investigation. That's a federal offense." I watched the moment hit her. Her eyes flicked back and forth, confused, like she thought someone would step in and back her up. But there was no HOA board here. No vote. No newsletter. Just law. But he's the one. He's not supposed to. This land is unsafe. The marshal raised her hand. "Turn off your phone and step away. Now." Karen froze, then slowly lowered her phone, her mouth still moving but no words coming out. She looked at me, like I'd set her up, like I'd trapped her. And for the first time since I'd known her, she was speechless. I walked over calmly, handed the marshal my ID, and showed her my FAA registration number, land deed, and documentation of the emergency call. She nodded. "You're clear. We'll take it from here." Karen was escorted to the edge of my property, arms folded, jaw clenched by 2 federal agents. She wasn't arrested. Not yet. But the paperwork had begun. And as the investigation unfolded over the next few days, the truth came out in layers. The pilot had lost power at 6,500 feet. Declared an emergency. Chose my strip because it was listed in a private registry of approved emergency landing zones. Zones which I had registered legally. His radio logs confirmed the declaration. The crash was unavoidable, but handled professionally. And everything I did, from reporting it to preserving the scene, was by the book. Karen's actions? Not so much. The FAA filed an obstruction report. The NTSB filed a trespass complaint. And I filed a formal cease and desist letter through my attorney, barring her from ever stepping foot on my land again. But more than that, I told everyone what she'd done. The community that once whispered about the weird guy with the airplane now knew the truth. I wasn't a hazard. She was. She nearly contaminated a federal crash site. She tampered with evidence. She delayed emergency responders by arguing with law enforcement. And worst of all, she tried to spin it all into some HOA fairy tale where she was the victim. But the footage she filmed? It became her downfall. Because once the FAA subpoenaed her phone records, her own recordings proved she entered the crash site uninvited. That she ignored repeated lawful orders. That she tried to reframe the narrative on camera before facts were even in. She didn't just cross a line. She drew one, right under her own feet. That I've dealt with a lot of chaos in my life. You don't serve 2 decades around aircraft and come out the other side thinking everything runs smoothly. But what I've always believed, what military training and plain old common sense taught me, is that when something goes wrong, you follow the chain. You report. You preserve. You document. Karen didn't believe in chains. She believed in command. By the time the FAA and NTSB had cordoned off my east pasture, I'd already given 3 interviews, filed 2 official statements, and submitted a detailed log of every pilot I'd ever allowed to use my strip. I had my records printed, signed, and time-stamped. And when I handed them over, the investigators thanked me for my precision. But Karen? Karen came back. 3 days after the crash. No permission. No contact. No legal standing. Just the same clipboard and a different attitude. This time, she wasn't shouting. She was smiling. Quiet. Calculated. "I'm just here to check on things," she said, strolling up the path like she'd been invited. Some of the board members were concerned about liability. If our neighborhood gets associated with this crash, it could affect home values. I said nothing, just walked beside her until she was squarely inside the taped-off perimeter. Then I spoke. "You're trespassing again, and this area is restricted by federal order." Her smile flickered. "I'm not touching anything. That's not how it works." And then she made her second mistake. She reached down and picked up a broken propeller blade. I watched her do it. watched her brush dirt off the edge like she was at a garage sale. "What's this made of?" she asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I lifted my phone and began recording. One tap, one camera angle, her face, her hand, the red line of federal tape fluttering right behind her. "You just tampered with a crash site," I said calmly. "That's obstruction." She blinked. "Oh, don't be dramatic." Then came her third mistake. She emailed the HOA. The subject line read, "Community update, crash scene details, and safety talking points." And inside, pure fiction. She claimed the crash was caused by negligence on my part, that the strip was unlicensed, that the aircraft was improperly stored and maintained by the property owner, that she had spoken to the FAA and cleared up the misunderstanding. It was all lies, and she sent it to over 100 households. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, is that one of her neighbors forwarded it to me. That same night, I put together a folder. Not just screenshots, evidence, photos of Karen crossing the restricted tape, video of her handling debris, a copy of the false email, and a flash drive with security footage from the solar-powered motion cam I'd installed at the pasture gate 6 months earlier. Footage that showed her sneaking in 2 separate times after the crash, when no one was watching. The next morning, I delivered it all to the FAA investigator in charge. Her name was Agent Delaney. Sharp, methodical. She didn't say much, but when I showed her the email, she leaned forward and reread it. Twice. "You're sure she's not authorized here?" she asked. "She's the president of an HOA that has no jurisdiction over this land," I replied. "She has no title claim, no legal standing, and no right to access anything on my property. She's been warned multiple times." Agent Delaney nodded. "Then it's time we make that official." 2 days later, the FAA issued a formal citation for obstruction of an active investigation. Karen Whitmore, violation, unauthorized access to restricted federal investigation zone. Violation, tampering with physical evidence. Violation, misrepresentation of authority. She was fined, not tens of dollars, thousands, and that wasn't the worst of it. The FAA published the report online, as required, which meant that her name, her neighborhood, and her actions were now linked in public record to a federal investigation. The local paper picked it up. Headline: HOA president cited in plane crash investigation for obstruction and tampering. That's when the calls started. Residents of Oak Ridge Summit, who had once looked at me like I was the outsider, now wanted to know how they'd gotten tangled up in a scandal they never signed up for. A few came to my gate in person, apologetic, embarrassed, asking what Karen had actually done. I showed them the email. I showed them the footage. And then I asked them one question: if she'll lie about this, what else is she lying about? That was the moment the tide turned. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be, because everything I'd handed over to federal investigators had already filtered back to the community. One of the newer board members, Jessica, a young mom who always kept her head down, called me afterward. She tried to deny it, she said it was exaggerated, said the footage was fake. Did anyone believe her? Jessica laughed. Not even her husband. Within the week, the board voted to suspend Karen as president pending further review. 3 days after that, she resigned. No press conference. No apology. Just a typed resignation letter delivered in a manila envelope and a moving truck that showed up before sunrise. The HOA didn't dissolve, but its grip loosened. Residents began asking for transparency, questioning fairness, reviewing bylaws. The illusion of power cracked, and once it cracked, it couldn't be patched. I walked the pasture again the day after the federal site was cleared. The grass had already started to reclaim the tire marks. The broken fence was rebuilt. The smell of jet fuel had faded, replaced by dust and wind and something that felt a lot like closure. The FAA investigator shook my hand before she left. "You kept your head," she said. "That helped us keep ours." Karen hadn't just overreached. She hadn't just lied. She'd walked into a fire with gasoline and then blamed the match on someone else. But the truth doesn't care how loud you talk. It just waits. And when it arrives, it lands hard, just like a plane with no lift. By the time the last federal vehicle rolled down the gravel road and disappeared into the heat haze, I stood in the same place where it all began, boots planted in the scorched grass, wind pressing against my shoulders, silence rising up from the earth like smoke. The pasture was scarred, but still standing. The gully had been marked and measured, the debris bagged and hauled off to an evidence facility states away. The tire ruts would take another season to heal, and I'd have to reseed half the eastern fence line. But the land was mine again, undisturbed, unclaimed, unmistakably quiet. The FAA had concluded their investigation. The cause of the crash was mechanical. Engine failure traced to a faulty magneto. No one's fault, just bad luck and good emergency piloting. The two men who went down in that Piper wrote me a letter afterward. Thanked me for what I did. Told me they wouldn't have survived if the strip hadn't been there. And that was all I needed to hear. I had done what I was supposed to do. Karen, on the other hand, she vanished almost as quickly as she had appeared. Resigned from the HOA. Put her house on the market. Left the community with a reputation in tatters and a federal citation she couldn't shake. Nobody came to her defense after that. Not when the footage hit the local news. Not when the FAA report got shared in neighborhood group chats. Not even when someone scrawled Karen lead in chalk on the HOA clubhouse sidewalk. Her power, like most things built on self-importance, collapsed in silence. I didn't gloat, didn't throw a party or hang a banner, but I did put up a sign, right at the gate where she first came through. White letters on matte black metal. Simple, sturdy, private airfield. Trespassing will be reported to FAA. Federally registered emergency zone. Authorized entry only. Below that, in smaller type, no HOA jurisdiction, no exceptions, no warnings. I didn't put it there to scare anyone. I put it there so the next clipboard crusader would think twice before stepping across a line they didn't draw. Funny thing about the law, it doesn't care how many meetings you've chaired, how many emails you send, or how many neighborhood fences you think you speak for. It doesn't bend to outrage or self-assigned titles. It moves slow sometimes, but it moves forward. And when it catches up, it doesn't knock. It lands hard. What Karen never understood, what people like her refuse to understand, is that property isn't about power. It's about stewardship, legacy, responsibility. And when you try to enforce control over something that doesn't belong to you, the law will remind you just how little of it you actually hold. That's what she forgot. Or maybe she never knew. That out here, fences aren't just decorative. They're boundaries, legal and lived. You don't cross them without permission. You don't rewrite someone's history because your map doesn't match their memory. And you sure as hell don't lie to federal investigators because you think your HOA badge puts you above them. It doesn't. Nothing does. Now, the ranch is quiet again. Not empty, quiet. The kind of quiet you earn. The kind that settles over you like a blanket when the work's been done and done right. I fixed the fence, rebuilt the windsock tower, tuned the Cessna for the first time in weeks. She purred like she was proud of me. I flew her once around the edge of the valley, low and steady, just to remind the land we were still here. Still watching. Still home. The airfield's registered stronger now. Marked on every map. Flagged as a known, approved emergency zone. I've updated signage, added cameras, and filed paperwork to ensure no one, not Karen, not her replacement, not any HOA in the county, can ever claim ignorance again. As for the community, they're different now, too. More respectful. Some wave when they pass. Others have stopped by to say thank you, quietly, humbly. They're not looking for conflict anymore. Just peace. Same as me. And maybe that's the real victory here. Not the fine Karen got. Not the public report. Not even the fact that she had to walk away from her little kingdom in shame. The victory is this. The land is mine. The skies are open. And the next time someone thinks the rules don't apply to them, they'll remember what happened when the law showed them otherwise. Because here's the truth. When you act like the law doesn't apply to you, the law has a funny way of reminding you exactly who it does.